Hello and welcome to Searching for Service, brought to you by Rotary District 5950 and 5960. I'm Kelly Kirk.
And I'm Joe Kirk.
And today we have yet again another amazing guest planned for this show. But before we dive into who our guest is, Joe's going to remind us of our purpose.
Oh, our purpose. Searching for Service was created to expose Rotarians and non-Rotarians to service opportunities. And what's really interesting is it's kind of transformed into, let's have amazing people on from different organizations, different Rotarians, and have them tell stories about service and how that's impacted themselves, their communities, and really go from there. It's really been inspiring. It's been a fun journey. So we're excited to have Bill on today.
Welcome, Bill.
Hi, everybody.
We're happy to have you. And so
Bill does have a last name.
I know. I was just going to, I know.
Tobin, yes.
Thank you. I was going there. I was going to share with our listeners that it's Bill Tobin. He's the Rotary Relations Manager and a liaison with Shelterbox. And so before we dive into what Shelterbox is, let's get to know Bill a little bit. So Bill, tell us, where are you from?
So you're going to dive into Bill before you dive into Shelterbox.
Sure.
I'm getting the drift of this show already. I was born and raised in San Francisco Bay Area in California, and then moved up into the Sierra Nevadas for 10 years, and then down and back into the Central Valley near Sacramento. It's a lifelong Californian, but now I also have a place where I am right now up in the North Woods of Wisconsin, right in the heart, or kind of the north end of 5960. So I feel semi-local at the moment. And I was just at the Siren Webster Club this week, so I'm getting my feet wet. Rotarians in the area here.
That's so great. I thought it was so great that you were, within a few hours of us, having, we saw California and we're like, oh, great. Yeah. And oh no, I'm in Wisconsin. Oh, well.
Right in our backyard.
All right.
So I personally like to call it God's country because that's where I'm from. So I'm happy that you are in God's country, Bill.
Well, me too.
And obviously you are a Rotarian yourself. And so how did you come into the world of Rotary?
Well, I had moved to a new community, and it was I wasn't sure. I traveled for a living, and my kids were in high school, so I wasn't going to make those connections that you typically do when you move into a new community. So my brother actually suggested looking for a service organization. He had been in Rotary before, back on the East Coast, and I thought, oh, why not? You'll meet some people that I didn't know at the time, but they'd have a great influence on my life, and they're outstanding human beings. And so I went to the local club there in El Dorado Hills, California. And that was in December of 2004. So I guess I'm approaching being an old timer here in Rotary.
19 years. Wow.
Math.
Yeah, math. It's tough.
Words can be hard sometimes, but so can math. It's all good.
That's awesome. And so you joined it because you felt like that you weren't going to get the connections that you would otherwise kind of naturally being around in your community. So you were able to kind of short circuit the process. That's exactly one of the reasons why I joined as well, is that, you wanted to speed up that process and just form some nice connections with people in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't know anybody, and you're told that there's a lot of movers and shakers. I've always been volunteer oriented in my adult life, and even as a teen. So it was a natural fit. I think if people tend to want to help others, then a great outlet for that and stepping stone to do those things is Rotary.
Yeah, I agree. Do you remember what your first service project was?
Wow, that's a good question. I do actually. It was a river cleanup on the American River and all along the coastal areas in California, as well as Oregon and Washington. They do a big cleanup once a year. So we went down at Folsom Lake, not too far from the prison, and basically just picked up trash, and we weren't prisoners. We were picking up trash. So imagine that.
And you guys had Johnny Cash playing in the background.
Oh, absolutely. Folsom is nuts about Johnny Cash.
What brought you? Did you serve on? Actually, you know what? Did you serve on any leadership roles within your Rotary Club?
Just by this point in time, if I haven't, they wouldn't be among my best friends, would they?
Yeah.
I did. The first thing I did, because I have a little bit of background in public speaking and radio, way back in the last century, and that instantly was, oh, you're going to MC our crab feed, which is a big fundraiser for the club. So getting up in front of a crowd wasn't an issue. Talking about Rotary was a little bit of an issue because I didn't know a lot about Rotary at the time. But my other members and friends helped me with that part. And that kind of just escalated into what else can I do? How else can I help? That the club, as most clubs face, difficulties in finding and keeping new members. And the existing members aren't immune from getting older. So sometimes you might have joined in your early 50s or 40s, but that was 20, 25 years ago. And now you're in your 60s or 70s and, up a bunch of canopies or something to spread out in events, just a little bit tough for you now. So, and that's where I am right now, by the way, but it was great. I was a club. The first real role I had with the club was I was part of the program committee. So I'd go find speakers, and that was also a great way to get to know people in my community. And then I was the Interact chair, which interacts the high school Rotarians, and I was club president and membership chair, and I went on to do district roles as well. So Rotary clubs, all kind of areas are grouped into districts. So I did a lot of work in the district, everything but district governor. I just didn't reach that pinnacle, which in hindsight, I think is a good thing for me.
What's been your favorite role thus far?
Youth, being a host parent for the youth exchange program.
Sure.
Rotary sends about 8,000 kids around the world every year on a full school year's scholarship, really is what it is. And you attend a school in a foreign country as a high schooler. And of course, you need host families. And so my wife and I have, and my wife is also active in Rotary. We just, once you've had a kid in your house from a foreign country, it's like pets. I mean, once it's gone, you want another one, So not that you have to clean up after them, but
Yeah, it's so interesting on this show, and one of the cool things that we've picked up is we've gotten to interview, almost 40 people now, and something that has been a real consistent factor amongst a lot of the Rotarians, a lot of the presenters, a lot of the people is youth exchange, either being part of it directly, either going to a different country or hosting or just being part of it.
Yeah,
it's been a real true mainstream piece of fabric that kind of runs through everybody, and it's just speaks to the power of the youth exchange and how important it is to not only the membership but also just expanding everybody's horizons a little bit, right?
Most definitely.
Yeah, it's Rotary's longest standing program.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
That's a new fun fact. Thank you.
Yeah, it was started. One of the things I did for the district with the Interact clubs was do what we call IPOTS, and that was Interact President and Officers Training, and part of that was sharing the history of Rotary. So I found that out. I think it was just after World War I, if I'm not mistaken. Rotary clubs started doing youth exchange. I don't know if it was a formal Rotary project program at that time, but that's its origins.
That's so cool. I always we learned so many cool things on this show. It's Kelly's a relatively new Rotarian. I mean, I've been in it for 3 going on 4 years. So, we're on the front end of our Rotary careers. Yes. And it's been remarkable how this show has accelerated that learning and understanding that typically happens.
It's kind of like drinking from a
fire hose
right now, but it's fun.
What did you do? We've got about a minute left here. like, how did you get involved? Because this is going to segue into our next segment. How did you get involved with the shelter box, becoming kind of the thread between Rotary and shelter box?
Well, I'm one of many threads between the two organizations, and I'm a little thread. I'm not even a big thread. I am the Rotary Relations Manager, so I'm kind of the go-between Rotary districts and clubs and shelter box in the United States. We've got a whole nother level above me that does more of the organization partnership management. I actually learned about shelter box from Interact, and I think that would be a wonderful story to come back to, because I certainly would take more than a half a minute to get that one. But again, you know, what a high school kid can do to somebody's life in a positive way is I'm a prime example of, look out, it could be amazing.
Yeah. Well, that does sound like we can segue into that for our next section and get a little bit deeper into that story.
Yeah, we've got a couple seconds left. I want to ask one more question. So in your history and understanding of Rotary, there are a lot of people that are listening to the show that have never served before or are looking for service opportunities. What's the advice that you would give them?
Join Rotary. Don't join a self-help group, because Rotary is a self-help group. I've become such a better human being through my experience in Rotary than any. It's worth every cent I've ever put into it, and tenfold.
That was beautiful, Bill. We'll end on that for the time being. We'll circle back here in the next segment. And as a reminder, you're listening to Searching for Service. I'm Kelly Kirk.
And I'm Joe Kirk. We'll see you in the next segment.
Hello and welcome back to Searching for Service, brought to you by Rotary District 5950 and 5960. I'm Kelly Kirk.
And I'm Joe Kirk.
As a reminder, you can find us on your favorite podcast platforms and
look us up by searching for Service. It's just look up. You can find us by looking up. Oh gosh.
So we need to write it out.
So it's so funny, Bill, because Bill's like, I don't understand what's happening. Bill, we've tried to figure out the best way to say searching for service without saying search twice.
Yeah.
And we've done it a couple of times, and we do it by accident, and I always screw it up. But for those that are just joining us, we are talking to Bill Tobin. He is he's essentially the liaison between Shelter Box and Rotary, and acts as that connective tissue, one of many connective tissues between the two organizations. So I think we got to learn a little bit about Bill, what's going on, how he got into Rotary, how he got into connecting with Shelter Box. So how about you give our audience a little bit of a taste of what Shelter Box is about and how it serves the world?
Well, I've been in Rotary for 6 years by the time I even heard about Shelter Box, and I was just completely blown away with the concept. I was actually our Interact Club advisor when the earthquake struck in 2010 in Haiti, and they would come to me on occasion and say, "Hey, what should we do about something?" In this case, the poor families that were affected by the earthquake there, and I never give them an answer. I just point them in some direction and let them find the answers. So I said, why don't you go online and look up disaster relief and Rotary and let me know what you see and find. And they told me about Shelter Box. So, of course, I had to catch up with them real quick. So I went to shelterboxusa.org, which is the website. Still today, that's the website. And lo and behold, I was completely blown away that this group of Rotarians. It was one club that started it all in the year 2000, the Helston Lizard Club. Look them up. They're in Cornwall, England. They wanted to do a little international service project for the millennial projects that the RI president at the time had challenged all the clubs to create something that would last. And so they wanted to do disaster relief, and their goal was to reach 8 to 10 families every year somewhere in a country that's overwhelmed with a disaster. Well, when I learned about that, and the Interact kids raised $1,000, just their little club raised $1,000, and then our Rotary Club matched that. And at the same time, I was president-elect, so I let our district governor-elect know what we had been doing, and so we challenged all the other president-elects, and we raised about $25,000 for the relief efforts in Haiti through ShelterBox. ShelterBox, it delivers, well, hence the name, it delivers shelter, usually in the form of a tent, but we also do a lot of tarpaulin-based shelter now. We do a lot of more permanent walls, like mud brick or bamboo for a more permanent structure. But it's really disaster relief. Right now there's well over 100 million people displaced in the world due to disaster, and a great majority of them don't have proper shelter. So it was a club's idea that really took off. What had happened was the 8 to 10 club goal or 8 to 10 family goal they originally had. The club next door learned about it, said, how can we, increase that number? And the club next to them, and so forth and so on. And fast forward 23 years now, and we've sheltered nearly 3 million people.
Wow.
It's incredible.
You guys undershot the number just a little bit.
Yeah, they're overachievers.
And for anybody who is watching our Facebook Live right now, Bill, you should just real quick give them an explanation of your background.
Oh, this background.
Yeah.
Shelter boxes, virtual. Otherwise, you see a very small, outdated kitchen in a Northwoods, Wisconsin cabin. So you can picture that in your mind, if you will. But the green shelter boxes, I'm going to ask, why did you choose green? And the simple answer is because those were on sale. So, yeah, true story. So the green box, you can fit a family-sized tent in the box along with blankets. We have a cooking set, things like mosquito nets and water filters, so people are healthier, not so susceptible to water and airborne viruses and illnesses. The ground mats, we have about 100 different items, so it'd be awful hard to try and list them all, but we have about 100 different items that can go into a shelter box. Way back in our history, it was kind of one size fits most, and we had maybe 20 items to choose from. But what we've learned is we have to be able to adapt. Even within one structure of a disaster, there may be several different types of aid packages that are needed.
Sure. Geography and climate, just depending on what they need, right? And
family size and dynamics. If it's a family, it could be multi-generations under the same roof, as we see in a lot of areas of the world. It could be a lot of children, and it could be children-led households. Most of the work we do today, as opposed to 15 years ago, is in conflict-related displacement, where we used to do a little bit of that work, and mostly disasters like earthquakes and storms and whatnot. That's really flipped upside down now, and we do most of our work for people displaced by conflict, because that's what drives the displacement numbers. 4 out of every 5 people displaced in the world today are due to conflict, which could be persecution, it could be war, it could be just public disorder because there's a government coup. All inclusive. It's 108 million people displaced by those conflict means.
I was just thinking, you guys are busy right now.
Yeah.
Yes, last year was our busiest year ever. We reached 420,000 people.
Wow, 1 year?
In 1 year.
Okay.
You had Ukraine happen, and you had increases in violence in Ethiopia and Nigeria, the Boko Haram violence there, and we had violence in Burkina Faso and Mozambique, and the list continues to grow. Unfortunately, in one sense, we've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize twice for our work in Syria. Now I say unfortunately because I'd rather not be working in Syria because they're at peace than having have been there now for over a decade,
right?
helping people displaced by war.
Well, and I mean, a common trait amongst most, groups that are serving is they want to put themselves out of business, right? You want to,
Right.
you want to actually not have to provide shelter to anybody because everybody has it, or
Right.
there's an ability for disaster response or refugee response and things like that. But how much does a shelter box weigh? I've always, like you said, 100 items, and I'm like, can somebody carry that?
Well, there's not 100 items in one box. That would
Okay.
Choose from, yeah. Choose from.
And we also do. We don't just do boxes. So the weight, to get to the answer question, the weight could be anywhere from a repair kit for a home, which are tarps, tools, all the fixings you need to patch up roofs and walls or windows as well. That only comes in at around 40 pounds.
Okay.
It's a separate container than a box. Our old traditional shelter box would weigh in at close to somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 pounds.
Sure. So two people
it's
probably.
a heavy item. And it's also rigid, as you can see behind me. They're big 40-gallon tubs.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually started introducing a couple of years ago, and now we actually do more bags than we do boxes. And they're just think of the giant sandbags that a lot of times, like the Department of Transportation uses them. You see them a lot, big sandbags. That we use those now because they're a lot lighter. Thereby, they're a lot less expensive to ship, and they're just as durable. They're actually larger capacity, and without the rigid sides like the box had, you could load it on a animal or even on your head if you need to transport it. It's much easier to wedge into place than a sturdy rectangular cube with a box.
That's interesting. I was like, I love all the little nuggets that we learn on this show.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's logistics around that stuff too. So that makes sense that you looked at that and decided to make a different little fix for it.
Yeah, well, logistics is a great word. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's such a difficult part of what we do. And logistics isn't just getting something from A to B. It's doing a proper assessment, making sure that you're providing aid that's going to benefit long term the families that we're helping. I mean, we are an emergency shelter, but we don't want what we hand to families to be redundant in 6 months. We want them to be able to use it for quite some time in the future.
Yeah,
I like that. That's so it's sustainable. I mean, that's one of the key words for Rotary projects is sustainability. So let's use the last little minute here and talk about do you know how Rotary and Shelter Box got connected originally? Well, it came from Rotary.
Yeah, it was a Rotary Club's project. Rotary Club started it, and after a short while, really, it became too big for a club to manage. I mean, imagine something that all of a sudden you're helping thousands when you thought you were going to help 10 or 12. It became larger than the club could handle, so it became its independent charity in the UK. So we're independent of Rotary. We're not a project or a program of Rotary. We're a partner with Rotary.
Yep.
Okay.
It's always kind of stood on its own 2 feet that way.
Oh, well, there you go.
I like one of my questions that we can lead into for the next segment is like, what does the follow-up process look like after you've gone in and helped families? What's the follow-up procedure from there? So I think that would be a really nice little segue into our next segment.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in the next one.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to Searching for Service. We will see you in the next segment. I'm Kelly Kirk.
And I'm Joe Kirk. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome back to Searching for Service, brought to you by Rotary District 5950 and 5960. I'm Kelly Kirk.
And I'm Joe Kirk.
And as a reminder, you can find us on your favorite podcast platforms, and
you can find us by looking us up and looking up Searching for Service. Yes. Yes.
Oh,
Thanks for writing that down. Good team.
I know. You are very welcome. If you are tuning in for the first time, we are in our third segment with our special guest, Bill Tobin, who is the Rotary Relations Manager and a partner of Rotary and Shelter Box.
He's like, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
That's close enough. I help connect the two organizations.
There you go. So where we left it off is, I liked that question, Kelly, is, what's the follow-up process look like? So a disaster happens, earthquake, people are displaced, and, what does the follow-up process look like, when
after shelter boxes come in, what does that look like thereafter to just make sure and prevent it? I mean, you can't prevent stuff from happening again, but just to make sure that all of that stuff has been utilized in the best way possible.
Yeah, that's a very important part of our process. We call it MEAL, and that stands for monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. And learning is a very important part of the process. When we do an assessment, we have a clear objective in mind, and it's not just to provide a family with shelter. It goes a lot deeper than that. As I mentioned some of this in the last segment, if they have water filters and mosquito nets, they're going to be healthier. So that long-term outcome of what we're looking for goes well deeper, I should say, than merely a number. It's easy to say we helped 1,000 families, but what's it mean? What's the help? 1,000 is just a number. So we're able to collect the data based on our expected outcomes and then the actual outcomes that we establish through doing exit surveys with the families as they receive the aid. We have a community feedback mechanism that's external to us, so it's independent. So the families may be more open to mention things that they aren't happy or satisfied with. We do post-distribution monitoring. This is a lot of times the local or area Rotary clubs will help us in this area because we've come and gone. They'll go and do get information through interviewing a number of the families that we help. And we collaborate all this in the case studies and we collect photographs and videos so that we could really measure what was our impact on various indicators. Immediate needs are met. We understood the training involved because we just don't hand something to someone. We want to make sure that they understand how to use it and what it's for. And then the accountability. If our scores are low, we're going to go back and talk with the people involved, whether they're a local nonprofit we're working with, or Rotarians, or the families themselves, always almost including the families themselves, if we could still reach them, and ask, how can we improve this? There are oftentimes local solutions that we as foreigners come in and we don't see it. It might be right there in front of our face. So that's why so much of our work is what we call locally led responses, that we are just there and we try and stay in the background and give advice and help the supply chain move and all that, and train and make the locally led response not only more successful and impactful, but also build the capacity to be more resilient should a future disaster happen. So the MEAL process is really involved, and it's a wonderful way. I would suggest to all Rotary clubs, all projects that you do, have a similar process in place, because it's really the only way to measure your impact. I love the dictionary project. One of the things Rotary clubs do, and they give dictionaries to kids, but I so often hear, we did 500 dictionaries. Okay, great. But what happens after that?
Right.
So have a process in place to measure your service projects and really see their impact and where you could improve.
Do you have a great story that illustrates the impact, or maybe your favorite project that had maybe an impact that you guys didn't really see coming, but was unintentional and was kind of special and maybe shaped Shelter Box going forward?
Yes, I mean, there's so many.
Right.
Excuse me. There's so many. But one that comes to mind is really interesting, and it really falls in line with the new Rotary area focus, which is protecting the environment. It's when you're shipping things, whether it's 100 miles or across the world, around the world, there's a lot of packaging involved. And so a few years ago, prior to the pandemic and all, Shelter Box realized this. When the plastic soup movement kind of started to get rid of all the problem plastics, we took that under our wing, and we really thought we could make great impact on that. So we're in Mozambique. The shipping straps. Now, how do I explain this to people without showing one? Like when you buy a microwave oven or something that's really big, and they've got those thin bands that tie, keep the box from opening, and you can't figure out how to open them till you finally cut them, and which is pretty much how you open them. Well, a lot of what's shipped around the world, you'll have those. They could be small, they could be 10 feet long, but they're all garbage, right? I mean, what do you do with them? So we were throwing them away, and then we saw someone locally was taking them all out of a bigger pile of trash, and we asked that person, "What are you doing with those?" And they showed us they were weaving baskets with those straps. We're using them as weaving material, absolutely gorgeous baskets, and then taking them to the local market and selling them.
Well, and strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, hey, we are going to throw them away. We'll have a pile of those just for you. And that's just taking something that would be normally thrown away. I mean, we have removed over 250,000 pieces of what we call problem plastics out of our supply chain. That's not just the stuff we use. That is the supply chain. That is convincing one of our many vendors and suppliers around the world to eliminate like a stainless steel cook set, and every piece is individually on a piece of plastic. It's stainless steel, folks. You don't need that. It's not China. You don't need that protection between that. So why have it there? And in the retail world, it kind of makes, it's shiny. There's absolutely no scratches. But in our context, it's better not to have that plastic, because then it ends up with the families, right? And what last thing we want to do is cause any harm. And if you dump a whole bunch of garbage along with a little bit of gear, you're going to end up causing some harm. People might start burning that plastic, which may be unsafe, especially in a controlled environment.
That's so cool. Like I loved the baskets out of the straps. I think that's so funny.
I am loving the resourcefulness of that individual too.
Yeah. And it's an interesting story, because it wasn't that we gave the person a tent or a tarp or structure. He didn't need any of that. It was just seeing a byproduct of our actions, and one that was somewhat unexpected and surprising. He said unexpected. A lot of what we do, we see what's expected. Families are no longer getting wet. They're above the flood, so forth and so on. They're outside of the shelling zone. But that's a good one.
The small things in life.
Yeah.
Yeah, the small things in life, right? But a really good example is what people do with our gear after they're done using it. So we were rebuilding a house, and we gave you a tent, and now you don't need the tent as your primary residence. What do families do with those? We've seen I think it was in Sri Lanka, but I could be mistaken. But a gentleman, it's a restaurant. It's a little tea room. And he says he serves the best tea in all the country. Of course, you can only fit, with little tables and stuff, probably 4 or 6 people in one of our tents, but it's now part of his income. We had some that sold or traded their tents when they were done with them to beekeepers, because they would follow their hives and be able to sleep amongst the hives, because bee thievery was an issue there. People would steal people's bees. So if you could live amongst your hives, there's a lot less chance you would lose your life's work, right? I mean, these are people that are living solely on the means they're able to produce through honey. So just really interesting what people will do with our gear after they're done with its initial purpose.
What's common misuse, or is there misuse? Maybe throwing it away is maybe the misuse.
Yeah.
Well, we try and make it so nothing is misused. And one of the things we've actually started doing over the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years now is cash supplements. So I'll give you a great example in Haiti. Another story for you. In Haiti, after the earthquake and tropical storm that hit there just a couple of years ago, we partnered there with Habitat for Humanity International because the Rotary clubs weren't in the little area where we were working. And one of the things we did was we gave cash because we were afraid they'd do just what you said. We were afraid they would sell the aid items to supplement other items they needed. So we provided cash. They could use it, unconditionally. They could buy labor services for it. They could buy more supplies. So, we only have so much we could give each family, and they may need more. Maybe some items missing. Food insecurity is another big one. They may need to buy food. Well, what we did in our post-distribution monitoring is we learned that the majority of the people bought chickens and goats. So they were addressing food insecurity, but you and I probably would have went down to the Piggly Wiggly store, or the IGA store and bought meat and produce, one-time use, and it's done. We probably would not have figured out that with goats and with chickens, our food insecurities are gone.
Right.
Well, that right there just exposes our short-sightedness versus they're like, we're trying to create as sustainable of an outcome as humanly possible. So
yeah,
that's amazing. I love that. I love that insight.
We just got a case study in from and it's so new. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly which country, but they took our rope, which is a nylon braided rope that's included in our kits, in our boxes, and they de-stranded that rope and they created a fishing net.
Love it.
Now, I'd be on a desert island, and I think you would too. We'd be on a desert island. We would have starved to death. That 100-foot of rope would have been right next to us. The natives would come up and said, look, how could they starve to death? They're right next to a perfectly good fishing net.
That's right. Well, speaking of that, we got to get out of this section, but we'll wrap up with the last one here momentarily. So.
As a reminder, you're listening to Searching for Service. I'm Kelly Kirk.
And I'm Joe Kirk. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome back to Searching for Service, brought to you by Rotary District 5950 and 5960. I'm Kelly Kirk.
And I'm Joe Kirk.
As a reminder, you can find us on your favorite podcast platforms, and
we do love those 5-star reviews. We really do.
We sure do.
Yes.
Anything else?
And you can find us by looking up Searching for Service on any one of wherever you're listening to your podcasts.
You did it. Nice job. If you are
blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while.
If you are tuning in for the first time, we have our special guest, Bill Tobin, and we're going to be wrapping up this last segment here with Bill. It's been wonderful so far. We've learned just a ton about his role as a Rotarian, but more importantly, his role through Shelterbox as well.
Yeah, it's been great.
What do we like to do in our last segment here, Joe?
We love to talk about the future, Bill, and we want you to do a little dreaming and a little wishing and a little hoping and share with our audience what you see as the future for Shelterbox, what you see for your participation in that role, or, with the organization or not, and then just kind of your hopes and dreams of what Shelterbox can do in the future.
Well, our vision is a world without shelter out where people, I'm going to mess that all up. I should know this. Our vision is a world where no one is left without shelter after a disaster. And, when there's 120 million or whatever the grand total is of conflict and disaster related displacements, that is a vision that's very hard to conceptualize. Sure. So what we can do in the near term and the short, far term with midterms, whatever, is we can grow our capacity. we could streamline our processes. One thing we did in 2017, because we respond in the Philippines more than any other country, it made good sense for us to create an operations center in the Philippines so they're more self-sufficient. They don't need people flying over from England or the United States to help do disaster response. They could do it on their own. That's been very successful. Last year, December of 2021, a typhoon struck the Philippines, Typhoon Ray, which was locally known as Odette, and it displaced millions. By the first week of January, and that happened the week before Christmas. By the first week in January, our SBOP, Shelter Box Operations Philippines, sounds like a singing group, doesn't it? Like a boy band.
It really does.
But the Shelter Box Operations Philippines team was already distributing aid. And in the first 100 days after that disaster struck, we reached 100,000 people. That is an incredible accomplishment for a staff of 5 people.
Wow.
Holy smokes.
What?
They could not have done it, though, without the Rotary Club of Cebu, which was the boots on the ground, the Rotary Club of Bohol, which is a neighboring island of Cebu, and Humanity and Inclusion, which used to be Handicap International, but now they call it Humanity and Inclusion International, which is one of the many partners we use around the world. That is what we want to see, what we've done in the Philippines duplicated elsewhere in the world where we do a lot of our work. So Africa has both conflict-related, large scale across the continent, conflict-related issues as well as weather issues. And we see climate change making storms fiercer, making the seasons longer. There was a storm off of Mozambique that we're actually still working in Malawi after that storm. It lasted 3 months. A cyclone that lasted that long just kind of kept zigzagging around the southwestern Indian Ocean there. Never seen before at that scale. So we need to scale up. We need to be more efficient, and we need more help. And that's where things like Rotary clubs, that's great. I love Rotaries, because it was started by a Rotary club. It's kind of a no-brainer. But what about the Moose and the Lions and the Elks and the Oddfellows and all the other service clubs out there? They should be supporting Shelter Box as well. A collective effort of many hands will get the work done for more people in a more timely fashion. So that's my vision for the future in Shelter Box. In Rotary, because I've done so much in Rotary. I've been like district membership chair before in a lot of different roles. And I think really the future of Rotary depends on our diversity. It's come a long way since I joined, and certainly a long way from the mid 80s when women weren't even allowed in Rotary clubs. And now I look around and say, what would we do without them? Right. I mean, you look at the cultural differences and gender differences, and Rotary is so open-minded and so accepting. And if you want to help your fellow human being, we'll find a way for you to do that. But Rotary is also facing a membership challenge here in the United States, especially where we aren't seeing a big growth, and we're seeing a lot of people age out naturally or just too old to want to try and do it anymore. So we're at a point now where I think it's I look at you two and I see the younger faces around. Yeah, I look young, but I'm older than I look. I see the younger faces around Rotary, and I think there's the future. But there's so many competing things these days for people's times, and the smartphones and the internet, they don't really help Rotary in a lot of ways. They do, but also they don't. They don't help get people together. And if they are, they're in little squares, like in the simulcast on Facebook Live here. They aren't, physically in presence of one another, and it makes it a lot harder to get things done. So. I would suggest, if you're on the call listening to this podcast and you're not in Rotary, give it a shot. There's going to be a club near you somewhere, and there's probably more than one. A lot of people will go to one Rotary club and it's not the right fit for them, and they'll think none of them are the right fit for that person. Right. But there's a club for everyone.
And especially as Rotary's expanded the club and having, service-based clubs, cause-based clubs. So like we've really expanded and responded to the need. Something I keep coming back to with Rotary is, we are a pillar and a beacon of service, morality, values. We care about people, and we just have to keep persisting, because I think people are really waking up and understanding how distracted they are, how busy they are, not productive,
Yeah.
and are going to really start to gravitate towards organizations like Shelter Box that are doing amazing work, like Rotary, that
Mhm.
are actually doing work, and it isn't just looking like you're doing work, but actually doing it. And that's Rotary does the practice. Like
Yeah.
we do the action. We're people of action. It's written in our DNA.
Well, it's the impact that you have. It's the humanitarian impact versus, like you said, the staying busy on your phone via social media, which is in my humble opinion, not a real world.
Right.
So
Yeah, I agree with you both. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's a self-help program. It really is. I've learned so much about the world. I've learned so much about myself. I've grown, as a human being, and
Yeah.
I don't think I would have had that same experience without Rotary. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't. I don't
Yeah.
see social media. I don't see it in today's news styles. I really only find that in service clubs, and there are some good ones out there. If there isn't a Rotary club in your area, go look
Right.
for one of the other letters, of the K's or the L's or the E's or the O's or whoever's out there.
our creative Rotary too.
We all have the same. Yeah, we all have the same objectives, and that's to leave the world around us a better place than we found it. And so, how can you go wrong there? But personally, I prefer Rotary. My brother was in Rotary. My grandfather was actually in the Elks Club, and that was back in the '50s. So I learned a little bit in the '60s as a young child about the value of helping others, and I think that's something that is also kind of lost in today's society. So if you are feeling a little lost, finding your place in the world, I mean, again, it kind of comes back to self-improvement, and you'll find that in the Rotary meetings and the Rotary clubs.
Yeah, and it's so funny you say that, because I think what's really interesting about Rotary, because it's international, because it's so broad, it's so difficult to be siloed, right? Like, I mean, sometimes it feels like that we get siloed in information or the people that we're around, and it's really difficult to do that. And, we've had an incredibly great opportunity to have all of these diverse opinions and people from different places and different types of organization. Like, it's impossible to get siloed into a certain type of thinking,
Yeah.
because you're constantly being bombarded by new and great ideas that are so outside the box or just different from what we're used to. And it's great. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Growth is amazing.
It is.
Yeah. Outside the box. Yeah, I got that pun. You might not have realized that, but yeah.
I was like, come on.
Sometimes I'll catch it, Bill. Sometimes I won't.
Yeah.
It's all good. All good.
Well, Shelter Box is I would say, the most successful Rotary club project of this century. But another little trivia for you young Rotarians. Did you know that Easter seals, we all know Easter seals, began many, many years ago in the 1930s as a society to help crippled children, and it was in Elmira, Ohio, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a Rotary Club's project.
Wow.
Hilarious. That's a perfect mic drop moment, because we've got about 30 seconds left here.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good for any sort of Rotary trivia night. That's a good one to bring up for Rotary trivia.
I love it.
Bill, we want to thank you so much for being a guest on Searching for Service. It was such a pleasure to get to know you and your role with Shelter Box.
Thank you so much for having me.
As a reminder, you have been listening to Searching for Service. I'm Kelly Kirk.
And I'm Joe Kirk.
It's time to stop searching
And start serving.